Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. It is lovely to see everyone. This is like the perfect amount of people for this space. So I'm glad this number of people signed up and attended and not one more. This is perfect. We have been doing a bunch of these events recently, and it's always great to see people, friends, new and old. And I'm very grateful to be joined by three awesome people who we will introduce in just a moment. When I joke sometimes, oh, and by the way, I'm Barry. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Hex. I joke sometimes that this is a very selfish company. I guess most are, because it's like a capitalist endeavor at some level. But it's a very selfish company because we started Hex just to solve the problems we had. And it suffered with for a while as like builders and users of data tools. And the specific thing at the last company we were at was like the data team itself. We had these really smart people and we ostensibly had these modern tools. And we didn't feel very impactful. We didn't feel like we were actually like driving things for the company. And Hex was kind of an answer to the riddle for why, how to solve that or a piece of it. As we've built the product and built the company, I've realized and found new ways in which that's true. But I've also realized and found new ways in which Nirvana is not another enterprise tool contract away. And that it really matters like who you have leading your teams, how you're organized, how you think about things. And we're very fortunate that we get to work with all sorts of great data teams and data leaders and see the way that they do it. And I'm very fortunate to be joined by three of them today. So I'm going to ask you guys some questions. Yeah, you look scared.
I am a little scared.
We're going to ask some questions, have a conversation, and then I'll open it up to the floor. So I'm going to start by asking you all to briefly introduce yourselves, and then we'll get into the good stuff. How's it sound?
Sounds good. Does it work?
It works. You sound great.
Sweet.
We'll start. I'll spare you. We'll start this way and come this way. So you're ready to go.
All right.
Tuhin.
This works too, right?
Yeah, okay. You sound wonderful. Yeah.
Well, thanks for having me here, Barry and the Hex team. Really excited to be here. I'm Tuhin Ghosh. I lead up the platform data science team at Coinbase. So Coinbase is organized into 4 different product groups. So platform is probably the second largest product group. And a lot of what platform does is like the common tooling, the common capabilities that power all of like the Coinbase products and services that you're aware of. So that's my team. Dubious distinction of also introducing Hex to Coinbase. So.
Dubious. Come on, man.
Hey everyone, my name is Sumeet. I work at Brex, worked there for around 5 years. I lead the data team, including data engineering, data science, data analytics, and we really serve kind of like the internal use cases. So we're building churn models and building out the company reporting and all the other things that come with data engineering in terms of making those things reliable. So it's been fun.
Can I go now?
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I must. Okay. I'm Julia King. I'm from Gusto. I've only been there for 6 months, so we'll see how much I can talk about Gusto. But we're also a centralized data team, so I'm head of that team, and we have all of the different functions and work with every team within Gusto. A lot of priorities on data quality, data availability, so a lot of similar problems that we're trying to solve as well.
Thank you. So I mentioned a moment ago, like this thing we had thought a lot about when we started the company about the value of data, impact of data teams. And I've come to believe this is kind of like one of the hardest questions. The thing that fundamentally on data, in the data world, we're sort of forced to grapple with. And I'd be curious to hear you guys reflect on this a little bit. Like, how do you think about that within your organization? Like, you're running these data teams. How do you think about the value you provide? How do you think about measuring ROI? How do you think about the perception stakeholders have of the value you provide? How much do you think about that? How do you navigate that? Tuhin, I'll ask you to go first.
Yeah, for sure. I can go first. So the thing is that like it really sort of depends on the business, right? What I mean by that is I was at Lyft before I came to Coinbase. And Lyft was interesting because it was primarily, if you think about Lyft, you're trying to figure out how to optimize supply and demand and figure out ETAs and how to route drivers, etc. So everything is kind of like data related. Like, if the core product is a data product, right? It's everything is data adjacent. And nobody sort of questions like what the value of data is. I mean, that company won't exist if they weren't a bunch of data engineers and data scientists. And then I came to Coinbase, and it's a very different business. It's probably a stronger business than Lyft, but a lot of it is driven by what happens in the macro, right? What the crypto sentiment is, what the regulations are, who gets elected, all of that, right? And that drives the business. There isn't as much for like sort of DS or Ds to optimize. I mean, we do our stuff, and that's where like this question becomes more pertinent, is that what's the value of data, right? And so Coinbase has also had this sort of interesting journey. So Coinbase IPO'd in 2021, and it was growing so rapidly in 2021 that the point of data was, hey, just build good dashboards so that we know how fast we're growing.
So we can see that number go up.
Yeah, exactly. Everything going up and to the right, and that's what we want you to do. And that changed in 2022 and 2023 when we went through a macro downturn. We called it a crypto winter, etc. And that's when we were like, oh man, we need to optimize this, right? We need to optimize our revenue. We need to sort of think about costs, etc. And that's where, so just like what data does and what the value of data is, changed quite a bit. Like I said, the context is the business and what like the sort of the macro context is. I'll actually stop there and maybe hear what Sumeet has to say or Julie has to say.
Yeah, I think you're touching on something that's kind of fundamental to like data teams, where we kind of come in after sometimes on a lot of problems where the business itself is using data, or someone in the business using data to make a decision. Like, they don't always have a data person next to them helping them. They're just doing things either by looking at an existing dashboard or trying to find a way to upsell a customer. And then all of a sudden it becomes really clear on the value of a data person, because we can come in and make that job so much easier, right? And I think having kind of that sometimes follow on like approach can make it undisputed that we can help. Sometimes it's hard when you're kind of coming in. It's like, I have this headcount, I need to develop them a bunch of projects and find a way to measure that as our high ROI. It's ends up kind of with a recipe of you're creating work that maybe doesn't need to exist, and you're trying to upskill people that maybe don't even have a use right now for data because they're doing quite fine without it. Despite everyone wanting to be data driven, I think something we've learned pretty clearly, it's like when that need starts to become like a burning fire, like all of a sudden no one has that question. They don't care about the data value. They just want it to be better and want it to be faster. And all of a sudden you can get more predictability out of it and all the things that come with adding like a data scientist or a data engineer to a particular problem. I think to me, that's like, it's a lot easier sometimes to be in that support role and then develop the partnership versus trying to kind of go around finding every single possible place to put data in.
I agree. I think one of the big challenges that we have, and I've had in Gusto and prior companies too, is also separating the value of building the data foundation and making that solution more scalable versus saying we can build you a model. The model is a lot easier to measure. There's an ROI on, like we were just talking about risk model the other day of how much money we were able to save because we prevented that much fraud, right? Like it's a lot easier to put the number to that problem and what the impact is versus what is the model build on top of, which is a ton of other work that has to happen for this to even become a reality. And so I think the challenge becomes not even always the value of a whole data team. It's a lot more about the value of the foundational data teams that allow for this to happen.
So how do you navigate that? Because you were mentioning like a Lyft or like a risk model. There's these use cases where it's like, hey, we are on the data team. The deliverable we have is something that's like either part of the IP of the product, like how we're doing supply demand optimization, or it's measurable in terms of like we had this much fraud and now we have this much fraud or whatever it is, right? But like I usually the vast majority of data stuff isn't like that either, as you said, because it's more foundational, or it's just like we're supporting this decision with an insight. It's very hard to measure. I want to really pin you down on this. Like the rubber meets the road. You're going and advocating for headcount or tools or whatever, budgetary thing. how do you navigate? What have you learned about having those conversations and like how to justify, the wonderful and expensive people you have and the tools you have and all that stuff?
Like laughing because one of our senior managers is right here. And we just had this conversation today. She's like, I'm just going to drink. It's really hard. Yeah. We've been trying to use a lot of examples and trying to explain how, like, in the real world, in the real data world, if we don't do these things, if we don't hire these people to build the foundation or invest in data quality or invest in building the more scalable solutions that we need, like how long would it take for us to build that risk model? And so like that's one way to do it. Do the powers to be believe us when we do that? TBD, sometimes it works not as good. But I do think, especially, I'm going to say it, AI. AI has
I thought we'd make it a little further in.
Nah. I think AI has been an interesting kind of big, not wrinkle to all of this, because obviously there's a lot of hype and I'm sure we're going to talk about it later. But I think there's becoming more and more of a realization of how accurate data is important for any of the tooling to work, including models, right? So I think when we had humans building models, a lot of the complexity was sort of hidden because they would figure out how to build this solution. But if you put a tool on top of it, something like AI, where at first it looks like it's doing all the great things and then it breaks because the data is not clean or we don't have the right tables or the names are confusing, and it gives you wrong answers. As a user of that, whether you're a leader in a company or product manager, or whatever, you start realizing that value of that data foundation and good quality data is important. So I think in a way, it hurts us in the short term, but maybe that's another way of saying, but see, this is why this is important. Doesn't matter if a user builds a model or an AI agent is trying to build a model, like that. If we don't have that foundation, it's not going to work.
You guys have any insights?
I think in terms of like justifying headcount or like advocating for kind of a new area, it's like, for me, it's like, it should be so painful that like you don't have a capability that data science can own or data engineering can own. And like you've also maybe done a proof of concept. Like I think that's part of what the prioritization is for any team. It's like you almost want to like show before you get that it's actually going to work and it's going to be worth it, because it is a risk, right? Like adding a new headcount, having a whole 2.5 quarter work stream stood up and start running. It's like, maybe we can start going quickly to figure that out, or like really have many projects stacked up back to back to back to make sure that it's not just like, oh, I have a new project, I need someone for this. It's like, well, what's going to happen next quarter? And that was how in the ZERP era, people would get headcount. It's like, oh, like this new team formed, like they don't have a data person, let's add a data person to that. And then all of a sudden another team forms and another PM gets hired and another data person gets hired. And you have like 80 data people for 80 PMs. And it's like, that was unsustainable.
Well, every PM needs their pet.
Of course, yeah. I mean, especially during
how are they going to PM without it?
I remember during review season, especially, I'd get like 1,000 pings being like, was this product release impactful? Tell me exactly how many dollars amount I made. It's like,
can the chart look like this?
Yeah, can you just, I need to put this in my review.
I thought about building a mode in Hex that's like, it detects whether the y-axis is positive or negative sentiment, and it just kind of gives you a little boost in the chart, whichever direction, I think that'd be a popular feature. A funny experience I have in my life is I still hold on to this identification I have as like a data practitioner, having been on like sort of one side of it and help support people on one side of it. And then now I'm the powers that be. Like I'm the CEO, like the headcount requests.
Yeah, how big is your data
team?
Come
to me. Our data team is 5 people now, but I will say that I find it interesting to like self-reflect on this, that the most persuasive headcount arguments don't come from our wonderful, incredible, transcendently amazing head of data. They're coming from like the partners that the data team is working with. It's like when our transcendently wonderful marketing leader who's here is saying like, I need like data support for this. It's like, that's when it gets really visceral. It's not like the data team. And there's something interesting about that like stakeholder dynamic of being in data, that it's like, it's tough to talk about sometimes because you're almost acknowledging that you're a bit of a service org. But I'm curious to hear you guys talk about this a little bit, like Tuhin at Coinbase, like how do you think about that dynamic of it? Because there's like the, hey, I want to hire great data people who are going to build analyses that are right. At some level, although it like really matters that like the people you're working with are very happy, and like how much of that are you thinking about as you're working with your team?
So let me actually take a second to sort of answer, just like a comment on like the
Please, yeah, it's all connected, yeah.
So I have relied on in the past 3 years, because like I said, Coinbase is very different than Lyft. At Lyft, I never had to, or none of us had to ever sort of fight for data investments, right? But Coinbase, I think like the rough heuristic that we think about is, what sort of like PM to DS, and I'll specifically talk about like product. I mean, marketing also needs DS, but like, what kind of like sort of PM to data ratios make sense, right? And so what we would do is like we'll take numbers from, places which have done well, like, Meta, Netflix, etc., which are mature businesses. We know that data did well there. And like, that rough ratio is somewhere between 1:1 or 1:2 DS to PM ratios at Netflix and Meta. So if the area of the product, something like risk, which we know requires metrics, requires trade-offs, requires a lot of sophisticated experimentation, it's like a really sort of nuanced balance. Hey, we should be looking at one, aspirationally, we should be at 1:1, right? If you're launching a new product and all you care about is like sort of like tracking usage and like sort of weekly active users, maybe you can start with like 1:4, right? And then as we figure out that there are needs to do, like I said, more like trade-off decisions, more experimentation, like, is there like opportunities for actually sort of automating stuff through ML models, etc. We should aspirationally move closer to that 1:1 ratio. So that's the way we think about like.
And are people bought into that? Like when you bring that to your finance team or whoever you're sort of like presenting that to, are they like, yeah, numbers make sense? Like how are you kind of backing that up, those ratios up?
So, I think we have been on a journey. This was, so it depends on like, where people come from, right? So somebody who comes from Meta, like they will buy this argument for sure, right? So somebody who's maybe had like, their career in startups, like, they've seen like different patterns and different models. It's a different sort of conversation. I think we've gotten to a point culturally where everybody is product leadership, engineering leadership is roughly aligned. Now, we do have certain areas where like, product is not like the main stakeholder, it's engineering, right? So for example, and that may be the case with, one of our areas is we have to manage liquidity, right? How liquid should our assets be? That's not a product thing, it's an engineering thing. And so again, there you have to sort of like, the rubric that you use is, do you just need foundational metrics and that's it? Or do you need to make trade-off decisions? There's a certain sort of unique cognitive repertoire that like data scientists and data people have. Can that contribute to the business? If that is the case, we should be sort of improving that ratio. That's the way we've modeled most of our investments.
That's interesting. And so then shifting that toward like the consumers of that, like when you think about the stakeholders you're partnering with, like, I don't know who the stakeholders for the liquidity decisions are, I don't know, head of liquidity or something. It's just like, but how do you think about that dynamic of the job? Like, I think some people call this like politics, or there's like other words for it, but like, how much of that are you like working and coaching your team on, or how much of your day is spent on like the sort of like delivery and buy-in and like NPS, for lack of a better term, like of the stakeholders you're partnered with?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'll have a very structured response to that, but I think the sort of different pieces of that when I think about it is, so you are meeting with your stakeholders regularly. You're also hiring a team which is very curious and passionate about like the business problem that you're solving. And that is something that we've actively tried to do because, there were people who were very happy being in a support function, being consultants, just doing reporting. But then you bring in people who are like, this liquidity problem that I was talking about, right? So we have to decide how much of our assets need to be liquid because that exposes us to risks. Like the DS who was on that project came to me and said, I think we're doing it wrong, right? I really think that there should be some optimization of how much we keep in hot storage and cold storage. And these are crypto terms. But, and so it's my job as a DS leader to then go to the engineering manager because they're the ones who are running this and basically say, look, we've done some offline simulations. We can save X millions of dollars if we do this, right? And that's very tangible, right? I don't always have that in my pocket in every conversation. In this case, it was very tangible. Hey, let's further this partnership. I'll put a more senior person on this project, but we are looking at potentially X million dollars in sort of savings with proper liquidity management. So that's the kind of sort of conversation you have. But like I said, I also want to be sort of a little bit, candid here that not every engagement works like that. Like some of these engagements are, hey, we are launching this new, if folks remember, Coinbase launched a NFT marketplace, right? When NFTs were a thing.
Remember that? That was crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
That was wild.
Like apes smoking cigars and all of that. That was kind of cool.
What could go wrong? What could go wrong?
So when they were launching that, so I was the data team supporting that launch. I was like, what are we going to do with this, right? It's like, we just need to sort of figure out how much traction we are getting. So there, my point is like, okay, you need some amount of reporting, some amount of sort of either regulatory reporting or just financial reporting. And those are foundational needs. And this is my estimate of what is needed to just support those basic regulatory and financial. And then we figure it out. If this business picks up and if, there's opportunities for doing things, getting sophisticated with the metrics, looking at sort of experiments, doing some trade-offs, we'll invest more.
What about you guys?
Yeah, I think at some point Brex is not hiring at all or very little. And the question to the folks who are asking for data people were like, you want to convert a headcount? And that was a good test.
Kind of the ultimate litmus test, right?
You're trying to hire another marketing person or engineer. How important is data to you? Do you want to make that person a data engineer or data scientist? That I think really helped.
How did that go? What was the answer?
Not a lot of headcount on the data team, but I think
how did that make you feel?
I think it helped clarify though, it is tight and it should be an expectation. Everyone in their role has some aspect that they can self-serve. Hex was a great tool for that for a lot of our engineers. Why am I hiring a data analyst to do a dashboard for this launch? I built the tables. I know the data. I know all the joins. I can build the dashboard. And I think that kind of helped alleviate some of that support and also made it clear that's not going to be a role that we're going to staff for every single launch at this point. We're going to be more choosy. We're going to have that level of headcount threshold of would you convert an engineer? Would you kind of do that? And so I think it helps communicate that message of this is the new state of the world. Everyone talks about being data-driven. Everyone wants to self-serve. It's now's your chance. Come on.
Put up or shut up, baby.
Learn some SQL. Let's go.
But just to go a little bit deeper, because I talked to so many people about this type of thing. Today, or as you were going through that process, you was do you want to convert a headcount? People would, sort of hem and haw. Where are the places, or what do you think are the shape of it where that partner is I would convert a headcount or maybe it's just the current data people that are supporting them. They're I need these. How do you think about that in your role? Are there things you do with your team to try to maximize that sense of essentialness?
I think one area that was recently this is on the finance team for us. We were just seeing a lot of spreadsheets passed around, a lot of numbers that were should be in a table somewhere. A lot of calculations happening in those spreadsheets that at some point it's are we going to hire another financial analyst when we should add a data engineer to this and put things into tables, automate a lot of these manual decisions that are happening, at least so that when we do come around and maybe build a model, we can trace it through and actually maybe model some of that stuff. So I think it is that point of you start seeing that exhaust of the non-data person's work and it just accumulates and accumulates. And I think at that point, our CFO, Ben, and I talked and it was obvious. I think it has to get to that obvious point. But there's a lot of people that they think they need it and then you challenge them and it's we can kind of get away with not having it. Or okay, how about we just get 20% of this person's time and it becomes not a full headcount. So I think that is kind of how I think that ends up shaking out. So you need some amount of data work in that space that like could use a data person, I think. I think that is a good sign. If it's completely started from scratch, it's like, maybe you don't need a someone. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we're doing great. I think what we are coming to is that I'm going to go back to data foundation, my favorite topic, but we would love to unlock a lot of the self-service value and the capabilities, but we have to fix some of the data that's coming into the data warehouse and thankfully we're not the only ones who have this realization. So engineering partners and product partners have the same. And so really focusing on how do we staff the right team to go fix it so we can allow for these types of solutions to exist versus today where we have to staff it with data people because the data is so messy that it just takes a lot of time to figure out what the right answer is. And so up till now, I think, and I say this because I haven't been in Gusto for as long, but we definitely fixed some of it with putting people on the problem. And we all agree that that's not the right solution long-term. And that's how we're thinking about it going forward. And we're actually going through our annual planning right now and talking about how we're going to take a step back and think about how do we clean up our data coming from our source systems, coming from our Salesforce instances, coming from any other, external tools that we're using as well, so that we can but feel more confident that somebody going in and building their own version of a dashboard or looking at the data and building their own joins is actually going to get the right answer, or hopefully will get a better answer than what they can do today.
Less wrong.
Yeah. Directionally correct.
Yes, that's right. So what more can you hope for? But and how much of your time when you're talking to the people on your team, you're coaching them, when you're thinking about who you're hiring, how important is it that you're bringing on people who have, they're not just doing a good job on the analysis or the data pipelining, but like the sort of stakeholder, almost like the sales ship of feeling impactful as a data team? Is that something you think about, or?
We do for certain roles. The way we've been thinking about it is that we have certain roles like data analytics is our embedded team. They're the customer-facing part of the data team. And so we really think about them as the ones who represent data as an organization and the impact that we can provide, regardless of whether they're the ones who are actually doing the work or if they bring it back and the decision scientist has to build the model or data engineer has to build like a solution. And so that's where we kind of put a bit more of that expectation and pressure. We talk about like internal PR and how do we think about what solutions we're building and how do we communicate that. A little bit less on some of the more technical and or specific roles. Like I might not care as much about my risk modeler if they can go out and advocate on the team's behalf. So like we started to really separate what those expectations are depending on what kind of work we expect them to do.
Interesting. Internal PR, you said. Is that like a term you just made up?
I've been using it for a long time. Where's my Square people?
What's your
internal PR? It was a thing.
Well, how do you do internal?
Oh God,
we're bad at external PR.
PR in general is really hard. I actually literally yesterday, I think, asked our CMO about if I talk about governance, most people just start yawning. Do you have a better term for me? He said he'll get back to me. He hasn't figured it out exactly.
Lost you for a second there. Yeah.
I know. We're like, we know it's important, but like we need to rebrand it. So
people don't care about it until the numbers are wrong.
Yeah, which are all the time. So I don't know why they don't care about it.
Well,
yeah.
IPO readiness.
Not allowed to say that.
Yeah. You didn't say that.
I know.
I'm obviously very interested in this because it's to me it's like this paradox on data teams. It's like you have a bunch of really smart people. They're working really hard. They're doing work that is like correct and right. You often think it's moving the needle on the business. And then you get to annual planning, or you get to headcount planning, or crypto winter hits, or whatever happens in the business. Where all of a sudden it's like, hey, why do we have this many data people, or why do we need more data people? And like, I've come to this belief, I was alluding to this earlier, that it really comes down to like the people around the data team are advocating for it. But that does strike me as it requires a level of PR adroitness that is not necessarily what is like selected for in data team interviews.
true. We do talk about it a lot. And do we interview for that? Probably not, or maybe we should in certain cases. We do talk about data storytelling, which is not sort of the same, but internal PR is probably a little bit wider than that. But we do talk about how do we represent our work. I'm very lucky that the team at Gusto has been really amazing at brainstorming and thinking about like how do we change it and knowing that it's something that we need to continue to improve. And so we have some ideas of what we're going to try to do. I don't know if I have a perfect solution, but we've tried many things. We've tried to run, like at Square, we tried to run QBRs, which were a lot of work. And they were pretty good. Mixed sometimes better than others, but like trying to figure out how do we surface our work. The problem for data team too is that a lot of our work ends up being surfaced through other teams, right? Like if you're partnering with a liquidity, we have actually a similar model, which is so interesting. But like if you partner with somebody who leads that team, they're the ones who are actually going to present the overall result of it. So presenting it again as data work becomes kind of challenging. And so how do you find similar but different insight that hasn't been presented already?
Yeah.
Do not look at the numbers until we present them.
That's right. Only the data people can do that. Okay, I got a couple more questions, then we'll open it up. So I want to build on this topic on people interviewing skills. I made a new friend tonight. Where's Alan? I was asking, there he is. I was asking about what he's interested in. He's talking about the idea that data roles are going more full stack. I think there's other people who, it's an interesting debate. I've talked to other people who think that data roles are going to get more specialized or narrow. There's a lot, we haven't really talked about this much, surprisingly, about AI. So like, and how that'll, if you tried, you did, how that's going to change data roles. I'd be curious just to get you guys' take on this as data leaders. Like, what do you interview for? What are you thinking about? And I'm especially interested in how that's changing. Are there things you guys are looking for now that you weren't before? Are there things you think will be more or less useful? Like my personal thing is like, it used to be that it really mattered that you had like a really thorough knowledge of the pandas syntax. If you're like a data scientist, it's not clear that that's like the most important thing anymore. But like, does it matter that you know what it means at all? Like probably like so it's like this stuff's evolving and AI can write SQL now. Does that mean all the data jobs go away? I roll my eyes as well. I was like, but like, I'd love to hear just your guys' point of view on like what's going to happen with data roles specifically. Like, what's this look like over the next few years? I'll toss it to you first.
Yeah, I definitely think like it should conceivably get easier to do any of the data roles if you have like basically the base knowledge of being able to SQL and like SQL really, really well. I think that...
You mean easier from like the technical bar goes down because...
Yeah, because of AI, right? Like you can ask it to do random forest. And like if you have a clean data set and you've done that work, which is not easy work, something AI probably can't do. And we talked about that a little bit in the pre-interview thing. But I think like it is really important to get that technical knowledge of how data goes in and out of a system, how tables relate, how to find like the right information, how to feature engineer. That's probably what I would care the most about is like the curiosity of like, and honestly like passion for data. Because like, if you don't have that part, like the SQL, the AI stuff, like it's not going to click in the same way that that role will be a data role. Like you can do all that stuff as a non-data person, but if you don't really have that like, I don't know, passion, understanding, and also the technical skill on the SQL side, probably the most at this point, like along with understanding the actual mathematical concepts behind some of the modeling techniques and how to create great data infrastructure, it's kind of you're never going to get there. I feel like.
Well, on that last point though, you said like, yeah, the LLM can do a random forest for you now. I'm sure it can, but like I'm not sure that I would want a data scientist on our team or an ML, whatever the title is, like being like, build me a random forest, and it builds a random forest, and it could actually be like the code runs, it's good, but like, do you know what this is doing? Is it the right model to select? Can you interpret the results? Can you update it? Can you maintain it? Like, it's an interesting question. Like, would you want to hire someone who like didn't know how to build a random forest, but is like just able to invoke it via magic?
I guess like you would hopefully have enough of the background on all of those things that like that part of like generating not just that model, but like 6 other versions you might be considering and then evaluating it, like the threshold in terms of knowing maybe also comes down. But I would hope that like, I think probably that's the answer to the question. Like if you're looking for what you should learn as a new data scientist is all these conceptual concepts in a really deep way. And at least one thing technically deep. It just sounds hard, honestly. But like that's because you don't really have to know all the steps between A and B anymore. Because you can hopefully get an AI to do it. If you know at least how to pick like the right result and this result and interpret those results, you can probably throw out that random forest if it doesn't make sense. I would think that's some of the work we still have to do, right? Like, you know, you might try to do all this pre-work to determine what the right model is. You might be down to 2. It's like, okay. Usually it takes a lot of effort to build 1. Maybe there's now a possibility to do 2 faster. You still got to pick. So yeah, I think that decision point becomes a little bit faster and earlier in the process, which is kind of exciting. It also kind of makes that like choice a little bit easier maybe from the data scientists.
Tuhin, how are you thinking about data roles? What's going to happen? What are you guys looking for and not looking for in the roles you're hiring?
Yeah, there's a lot of different threads in my head, but let me see. Like the ones that I want to talk about is what does it do for data hiring? So this is kind of like, I'm going to use the often used metaphor of freeways in LA, right? So you broaden the freeways, does the traffic go down? No, like there's just more traffic, right?
Reduced demand.
Yeah. So the thing is that like most data teams are overwhelmed. It's not like there isn't enough data stuff to do, right? So there is this myth that like, AI will come and then like all the data problems will sort of like resolve themselves and you'll need fewer data scientists. I kind of feel like there's like, we can now actually take on more of the backlog, right? Because we're just like so overwhelmed handling like ad hoc stuff coming from our stakeholders. All of that will probably be handled by AI and we'll be doing more higher value add stuff.
I agree. I think it's funny when people talk about it that way because it's like, I very rarely encounter a data team where they're like, yep, we can get the answer back to the stakeholder quickly on time. There's not a line. There's like, it's like, yeah. So you guys are behind. You can't possibly keep up with the demand. Oh no, absolutely not. And you're worried AI is going to. It's like
that's right.
It strikes me as a long way off from that. But,
right. So I think what my hope is aspirationally, what I want for my team is that we'll be doing more specialized stuff. So because like a lot of like the ad hoc stuff, I think that's a story of maybe every other data team. We tend to get overwhelmed by a lot of like the ad hoc stuff, right? We are in a very fast-moving sort of business, and there's a lot of like regulatory stuff happening. That's true probably most fintechs. And so my hope is that, we'll be doing, there's a lot of like, sort of things like experimentation and causal inference and like, offline policies that like we should be paying attention to that we don't pay enough attention to. And so going back to your other question of, are we hiring differently? We absolutely are hiring differently. We are, and that sort of depends on like the role. So most companies, sort of Coinbase-sized companies have data scientists, senior data scientists, staff data scientists. At the data scientist level, you're looking at sort of like technical execution abilities, and that's tends to be the core focus. When I'm looking at an L6 staff data scientist, I'm looking at somebody who can frame problems, right? So that wasn't the case 3 years back. It used to be, hey, can you handle a lot of stakeholders and like take in like 1 million requests at the same time? No, but the emphasis is now changing on like there's a lot of stuff, like a lot of the boilerplate stuff can be taken care of, but can you really embed yourself into the business problem and frame the right business questions that need to be answered, right? And we are looking for that. We're trying to sort of like design our interview loops so that we are testing for that during the interview loops.
That's really interesting. Julia? Are AI going to replace your whole team?
No. But I agree that we do hope that some of the more like operational, repetitive sort of metrics that we have to pull over and over again, if we can automate ourselves out of that, I don't think anybody will complain because there's so much insight that we can find from our data that we're not able to even get to today. And we think that there's a lot of interesting nuggets and problems hiding in there that we can't even get to because we are inundated with ad hoc requests all the time. So like, I hope AI gets to the point where we can trust it enough to go do that so we can spend our time elsewhere. And I think in terms of hiring, and I don't know if that's changed necessarily. I think it's always been something that we try to hire for, but you said this curiosity. I think technical skill you can learn, or maybe you come with it. But I think the biggest value that the data person can bring to a team or a project is curiosity and asking questions and being open-minded. And if you can figure that out during interviews, how curious that person is, are they asking the right questions? Are they hearing a request but thinking about what the underlying problem is that somebody's trying to solve? Like that is regardless of whether you're data scientist, a data analyst, a data engineer, if you have that ability and like the trait, that's going to make you like LLM is going to be, you're going to be fine with any sort of technology that comes out.
That's what makes a great data person, I think.
I think it makes an incredible data person.
Yeah.
If I may just add one other point is that we talk about AI quite a bit, but also the tooling now is so much better. And this, appropriate moment for a plug for Hex is that I think.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, but we'll get you your bottle of wine.
But
later.
AI is still in its sort of, I won't say in its infancy, but it's still evolving, and we don't exactly know. I'm very optimistic about what shape it'll take, but it's not quite there yet. But what has happened over the last 5 or 6 years, or maybe a decade, is that you had this sort of Cambrian explosion of tools, and then there were some tools which won out, etc. And we were, frankly, even 3-4 years back, we were using sort of BI tools, which were leading to this. They were making this problem worse, right? So ad hoc requests, because self-serve wasn't possible. It took data scientists and data engineers forever to turn requests around. So I also want to say that a lot of this change is also coming because the tooling, frankly, is getting much better. And there's also I think there's clear winners, at least in my mind. I already named one, but there are other sort of clear winners in each category, which I sort of think about. It's easier for a data leader to make those decisions today. And that seriously, that has improved the productivity of the team significantly.
Well, what a wonderful note to end. Oh, well,
I just want to
have something nice to say?
Yeah, no, not about Hex. No, just about data. What a cool job. Everyone comes to you every day asking for help. That's not that bad. I think that's one of the things that you're talking about is what makes a great data person is okay, if everyone every day comes to you asking for the same thing, do you just give them that, or do you actually understand their problem? Do you then provide them a solution that changes the way they work? And you get that opportunity. According to our Slack channels, 8 times a day, at least 9, maybe more than that today. I think that's exactly kind of where the support role of a data person is opportunity for driving ROI and all the stuff we've been talking about. And the day that stops is the day AI has taken over. And I guarantee you it's not anytime soon.
Yeah. Someone said one time they have another data leader said we did one of these events with they have a love-hate relationship with the questions from the business. It's man, it's so annoying getting all these questions, but the question stops. So cool. All right. Well, I'm going to open it up. I don't know if folks have any questions for our fabulous panelists. Who's going to be the first? Someone told me they were going to be a plant, and I forget who it is now. Jess.
Hi, I'm Jess. I work at Fivetran. We are Hex customers as well.
No one needs to say that. It's okay. There's the logos right there. We were plugging ourselves. Funny.
Cool. I was wondering how you keep your data team motivated.
She asked, how do you keep your data team motivated?
Sarah, are we motivated? Yeah.
Caviar?
That's right. I'm taking them to dinner next week.
Occasional dinners. There you go, Jess.
We feed them. I think what you were just saying, actually, the right, if you hire the right people, which is, goes back to how do you find people who are excited about asking questions, knowing that you get to solve these problems that are vague and open-ended in many cases, and seeing that impact that, maybe you did this body of work, or it was a model that you built, or a question that you answered that couldn't be answered before. It's like, it does take the right type of personality. And so in some cases, there's some motivation that we can provide as leaders, but at the end of the day, it's a type of problems that we can prioritize for the team that will allow the team to feel like they're contributing. And I think the right type of personality will find satisfaction from that. And I think the other part of it is giving the team some freedom to experiment and drive their own work. Like, how do we balance the day-to-day needs of the business? And in some cases, of course, there's a lot of work that is feels very like a drag, but how do we give some space and flexibility to play with different tooling, to try different options, to play with LLMs, to maybe look at some data sets that we haven't been able to look at before, to kind of feel like they have creative outlet. And so I think it's a balance.
Yeah, I think everything you said, I would agree with. I think also just learning from other really smart people on the team. I think that's something I get motivated by. Just kind of see everyone's work. It's a good thing about the position I'm in. I can kind of get a really close look at this incredible team that figures out AI and how to apply it to this new use case. And I think for me, to motivate other folks, it's hey, look at this cool thing. It's kind of how I try to go about it alongside everything else you said.
So when I think about the personas, on a data team, so there's maybe 4 basic sort of types of personas, right? So there's data engineers, analytics engineers, decision scientists, and applied scientists. And so I will speak more to the latter two because that's the world that I'm closer to. I think, what they get motivated by is ultimately business impact, right? So they want to have bi-directional relationships with their product, engineering, marketing stakeholders, and they want not just to be at the receiving end, they want their thoughts heard, they want to be able to sort of influence product strategy, direction, etc. Now, what gets in the way is one of the things we talked about, there's all this ad hoc stuff. So how do I can't do anything strategic, so there are ways of addressing that. But the other thing is that just the personality types on data teams, so we had some folks on our team take a personality test and they put you in these quadrants. It's a very homogeneous group. Everybody is pretty cerebral and introverted. And that's not great for, that's good, for doing deep work, but that's not great for evangelizing and sort of talking about, so that also gets in the way, right? So as data leaders, actually, I'm also that. And I also definitely fall into that quadrant, but I have to come out of that that's outside of my comfort zone. What we have to do is enable those sort of bi-directional relationships with our stakeholders. That I think is super important to keeping folks motivated. They want to be sort of solving hard problems and all of that, but ultimately this feeling that I'm having impact on the business is the best motivator.
Yeah, right. Your work matters. It's doing something. Someone appreciates it. It's true for everyone, I guess. More questions?
Hi, hello. I'm Gio. I'm with Checker. It's a question to get a perspective on how AI and how you think strategically about your roadmap and your investments, they kind of intersect. I think the narrow version of the question is, do you think it's still worth a strategic investment in cleaning your warehouse, building it semantically, kind of structuring the data as the AI can help you figure that out for yourself? And more broad version of that question is what is the kinds of things that you find now exciting strategically that you're willing to invest, given that AI is going to change everything?
I have a very strong opinion about that.
Let's go.
I actually do think that the investment in cleaning up the data and building the semantic layer is what's going to enable AI to be successful. I don't think AI can be without doing that. And so to us, it is the investment that we're making of how do we, do it in a contained enough space so we can really prove to ourselves that it's going to work. And either way, that's not, we talk about no regrets work. Either way, we need to do it to allow self-service capabilities. And if AI can then take it even further, great. But we do know for a fact, because we've tried it many, many times, that if you put the AI on bad data, you're going to get really crazy answers. And it's really hard to know when it's actually going to give you that answer. And so
the same for humans. You put humans on bad data, you're going to get really crazy
Then you know who to
answers.
yell at.
It's true. Yeah. You can fire the human.
I think the difference is the gut check of humans is a little better than AI. And I've been joking about it that we would see SQL statements that have like extra columns and extra like where clauses for fields that don't even exist in our underlying model. And it's basically AI telling us our data model is not good enough, apparently. Like, why don't you have that?
It's trying to help.
It's totally helpful. So it's interesting where and how it hallucinates, which goes back to like, it's why it decides to do that. I don't know if I know that, but my big assumption, and I'm even if I'm not right today, I'm hoping AI will catch up. By the time we're done, AI will catch up with us. That having that semantic layer and having that clean data structure will allow for that and will allow for other tools to work better as well. So either way, it's going to be a win for us.
Yeah, I think exactly. Like we're trying to do all those things, like not for the purpose of AI, but with the hope that like eventually that an AI will come and we'll actually be able to do this stuff.
So it's like a religious.
I feel like every time I've
We're
tried
preparing
to
for the day in which it will.
we all know it's coming. AGI. Not making a prediction on when. But yeah, I think that is kind of like it has to be table stakes at this point for a data team to care about that. Not just for that, but also because there's a lot of benefit to doing all those things, including like owning your own semantic layer, not having it only be in Looker and all these other things that I think have now seem archaic if we were to redo things from scratch. And most new companies don't do that. And I think something that we're thinking about for sure.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything significant to add, but there are a lot of investments that we are making to prepare, right? So we had really poor metadata, and that was okay because when humans are working with tables, etc., they can reach out to other humans and say, "Hey, what the hell does this column mean?" Right? So cleaning up metadata, cleaning up our data models, especially for areas where there's a lot of stuff can be self-serve. The blocker today is, the models are getting better and they're able to reason better, etc. But the blocker today is our data models are not there yet. We don't have metadata or governance in place where you can trust the results, right? So a lot of investments that need to happen, just foundational investments. And this is kind of the other part is that the engineering teams, for example, are using Copilot, Cursor, etc. The data teams are not quite there yet. There isn't really a cursor for data yet, right? So we probably will get there. But I think part of that again has to do with, I think part of it is thinking about these self-serve opportunities, but also thinking about the productivity of your data teams themselves. How can they, write this hex magic? What I think gets in the way of maybe hex magic being as effective as it could be is because it just doesn't have the clean data models and the metadata to work on. Right?
Totally. I think that is the paradox of AI and data. We obviously think a lot about I'll actually give an opinion on this because I think about it a lot. It's the hard part for AI and data is that it really is important that you're right. And the AI features we have today that are basically code complete can be a little bit wrong and still generally useful because it's directional. It's the same as software engineering. As you move up the stack to sort of higher levels of abstraction, being right's really important. So we're spending, you guys think about this a lot. Actually at Coinbase, we like talking to you guys about it. They're spending a lot of time on hey, how do we have the AI features be able to rely on a semantic model that we're synced in from that you're controlling, that you're updating, and have that be accurate, and then have it actually tell you what it did and which part of the model it relied. There's a lot of this that goes into it. It's not even just about the increasing the accuracy, but it's also helping the user understand why did it use this model? What did it do? What was the sort of thought process to the extent there was one? And I think that's just very hard to get right. Cursor works in software engineering because VS Code already exists. They're doing a lot of really impressive stuff. It's not quite so simple in data. And of course, we think about that a lot as tool builders, but I think it's very interesting for us when we talk to data teams that are starting to think ahead on that, on both how we're organizing our data, the skills as we just talked about that we're bringing in, how we're assessing tools. it's tricky because it's like this space is moving so quick too that you feel like you're kind of aiming off into the distance. And it's a very interesting moment. I'm not sure there's been a moment quite like this in my career, at least, on either side of it. Okay, we'll do one more question and then we'll liberate everyone. Yes. Hi.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and I work for a company called Kippy. We're a Snowflake system integration partner. So I'm on the services side, so I love it when my clients call with ad hoc requests every other week. I get paid for that, but you have to deal with these ad hoc requests. I'm curious around, do you have frameworks or how do you influence your executive teams? It's the beginning of the year. How do you say, like, here's how we're going to go about this year. Here's how we're going to, manage the business with data. Like, how do you influence these teams to leverage the data really effectively? Because I'm trying to help these clients, like, not just have these knee-jerk reactions when their stock price falls 10% one day and, we need to have this whole new dashboard. Like, I can only imagine what you have to deal with internally. So tell us about the frameworks or how you plan strategically for
You
this
guys
type
don't
of
get
work.
paid. You don't get paid per request. Sounds nice.
So I can take a stab at this. So there's a framework that I use, which I don't know. I don't want to make it too well known because I don't want everybody to use it. But it's basically starts with threats, and then obligations, and then opportunities, right? So when you think about what I want to do, threats are number one, right? And in in my world, you can imagine what like the sort of threats could be, right? So, hey, we're going to get defrauded by billions of dollars if you don't do that, right? And then there's obligations. Obligations are typically regulatory obligations, right? So threats, everybody signs up for. Obligations, yes, people are. And then opportunities, which excites me, but that's the one which requires the most convincing, right? So that's the first framework. The other framework is you need to have a very transparent sort of way in which you prioritize stuff. So even when we triage requests, what is this? Is this a compliance thing? If it's not a compliance thing, how urgent is it? Who's asking for it? What's the ROI on it, right? Can I put a number on it? This is how much effort will go into it? What's the kind of sort of dollar value of that? And I think for any new request that comes in, that should be pretty transparent, right? In the sense everybody knows why my stuff is not getting addressed while you're working on sort of Barry's request, right? So
you should always be working on my requests. Yeah. Sorry. All right. What about you guys? What are your frameworks?
Yeah, I think for us at Brex, at least, it's been a lot about the incentives in place for either those executives or those teams that orient around data. I think it's been really eye-opening to see when someone is committed to a number, how many questions they have about what that number is this month and why it moved. They want to know exactly how it's calculated and exactly what drives it and how they can impact that. And I think that's really clicked at least a lot on our GTM team, where we don't have to advocate for them to care about these financial metrics. They're literally getting paid on them, and they want to know exactly what it's going to be at the end of the month. And our job is to make that faster, better, more reliable, but also to educate them on the things they can do to make that stuff better. So I think that incentive doesn't exist. It's hard to necessarily completely generate that, although we try every single time with some of our EPD colleagues. And I think that's kind of something we've learned. It's all right, it's if that's really clear, we can definitely justify all the investment and the headcount and everything around that and make a big impact on that. So at least in terms of getting people to care about data and in advance, I think aligning incentives, honestly, is the simplest way, but it takes a big commitment from leadership.
Last word.
It's not going to be one word.
Figuratively.
I agree with that. And I would also say that we do spend quite a bit of time aligning with the leadership of the company and the product leadership and GTM leadership on what the priorities and OKRs for the year, for the quarter are. And that's kind of where we are all going to try to focus. And even though there might be, and we're not quite there yet, this is what we're trying to do. So I want to be clear, it's easier to say than do, but really trying to allow the data team, especially certain parts of the data team, to focus because that's where we know the biggest value is going to be. And so part of the framework is what is going to be the value of this work? What metric can we impact if we do this work? And if we can't identify it, should we be working on it? But being clear about what we're working, not working on, what you were saying, and like having transparency in how we decide or escalate when we can't decide ourselves becomes very important. So it's never a surprise to our stakeholders.
Wonderful. Well, that is a great last word to leave it on.
Thank you.
Stakeholders. Cool. Well, I want to thank you all again for being up here with me. Thank you for doing this with us. Thanks everyone for coming out. I hope you enjoyed this. We'll hope to see you at the next one of our events, and have a wonderful rest of your evening and a beautiful week.
Thank you.
Thank you.